Hello, I'm Luke, and this is how I made my Oscar qualifying short, Solstice. Oh my goodness, my plant is... Sorry about my absolutely dead plant. Hold on a second. Okay, so first thing when making any short is story. So I block out the entire story on paper first, so using a kind of beat sheet. This allows me to shape the story very quickly by arranging order of certain scenes or sections of the film. It lets me test out different ideas very quickly. Next thing I do is a thing called model sketching, where I jump straight into 3D and start blocking out basic shapes for the character. So even though I have this as the sort of next part in my pipeline, this modeling process really happens in parallel with this story writing, where I like to sort of get into 3D and get into that world, and it's quite a mindless process doing this model sketching, and at the same time I can be thinking in my head about the story, and I'm always ruminating on different ideas I've been playing with. And it's often the time where I have a breakthrough in story here is when I'm in 3D space working on something else for the film, and a story idea will come to me and I can sort of develop it at the same time. At the end of this model sketching phase, I come away with a range of styles and ideas I'd just been playing around with and noodling on. Nothing is off limits here, no matter how silly or bad it looks. So then I take all my favourite parts of that phase and I work it into a more final character, and then I move on to surfacing, so I'm just adding some textures and shaders here. I knew the character would be covered in fur, so the textures here were not too important, but it was just something to get on that base layer underneath the fur. I always knew fur was going to play a huge part in the sort of overall charm of these characters, so I started out testing some different systems, the first one being XGen, which is Maya's native fur and hair simulation tool. I've used it in the past. I've never been a huge fan of it, but since I was already in Maya, I thought I'd give it a go and see how far I can push it and see if I could get a look that I liked. Spoiler, I didn't. I don't like XGen still. After those fur tests, I thought it was a good time to sort of see how things were looking from the outside. So I like to sort of round up everything I've done so far and do some really early promotional material. Maybe a poster or some still frames of potential scenes. This just gives me a nice overview of all these small pieces I've been working up and how they all look together and how the film is overall starting to look, and whether I like the direction it's going or if I want to start to pivot and shift tonally. One thing that was missing from these early tests was any sort of animation and movement, and that's such a huge part of the charm of these characters and how they were moving. So in order to animate, I needed to first rig the character, so I rigged up my main character, his name's Tulok. I'm not doing anything too fancy here. I'm using a very standard rigging pipeline called Advanced Skeleton, which is in Maya, for both the body and the face rig. It just gives me enough flexibility to try some early tests for the animation. And so with the rigging finished, I moved on to some animation tests. As an animator, this is my favourite part. It's, for me, the time when the characters first come to life and you actually see them for the first time. Even though you've modelled them and they look nice in a still, they don't fully come to life until you start animating them. That's where you see all the character and personality come through. So I opted to just test out one shot from the film, which is the character emerging from the igloo. First time we see the character in full frame, the face and all the details of the hood. So I knew this would be a good test, not just for animation, but further down the line when I would test the fur and that system. Speaking of fur, I was never happy with the XGen test, so I had to pull out the big guns and go into Houdini, which is known as the sort of software of choice for any hair or fur today. But having never used Houdini before, I was very intimidated to give it a go, but I'm so glad I did, and it wasn't long before I got to grips with the basics and finally started to see some fur and simulations I was really happy with. So then, just to round out this early test I was doing, I just modelled the main environment of the film, which is his igloo. I created this environment with a mixture of custom modelling and tweaking and adjusting some models I sourced online from places like Megascans. Okay, with that, everything was in place for me to do my first vertical slice. So a vertical slice is a really important step. Before you commit this look to your entire film, you want to send one of your shots through the entire pipeline from start to finish and try to nail down a look that you're happy with. This helps you establish a sort of ground truth for your film and the way it's going to look. You can always look back to this one shot that you took through the pipeline as a sort of reference point for future shots to try and keep the consistency across the whole film. It's important to spend a lot of time in this phase, and I like to stay here as long as I can, tweaking, adjusting, changing the lighting, changing the fur, adjusting the shaders, adjusting the colour palette of the overall look. So it's really important that I'm happy with how this looks before I continue and apply these looks to the rest of the shots. So after all those small tweaks and adjustments, I finally had my first final shot for my new film. There are about 250 plus shots in Solstice, so now it was time to just do all that again 250 times. This time, however, I'll grow the whole film incrementally. So I'm not taking each shot to its final phase, I'm gradually taking every shot to the final point, slowly pushing it all through that same pipeline I just created. So with that, it's back to the start, back to animation, and doing the animation across every shot of the film. Now a little caveat here to say normally this is the point where you would do previs animation, not full animation. The idea is you do a very rough pass of the animation across your entire film, you then edit that together, cutting out any shots you don't need or the story doesn't call for, or tightening any sections of the edit and trimming those handles. Then you go back and animate only the parts that have made it into that final edit. This saves you time where you don't animate things that don't make it into the film, because animation takes a long time. I didn't do this in this film. I just really enjoy animation. This is my personal project. I was more than happy to just animate every shot in this film. It's my favourite part of the process. So I went ahead and just animated the entire film, knowing some of it might well get cut. Many months later, maybe years later, I then steered the ship back on a more traditional course and took my animation into the edit. I like to spend a lot of time in the edit at this phase. Even though it looks very ugly, nothing is lit, nothing is rendered, it is all play blasts from Maya. This is a very important time. Unlike my time wasting practices on animation before, this is the time where I actually do follow principles, and I stay in the edit, I trim it as much as possible, I tighten the edit as best I can, so that when I come to do what's next, which is fur simulation and rendering, that stuff takes a long time. Just like animation, you shouldn't be doing more than you need. This time I honoured that practice. So after a lot of time in the edit, I finally had what I was calling my final edit, my locked edit. I now have a film that I can watch from start to finish. This is a huge step. Now it's just a case of making it look nice. So my pipeline was from Maya to Houdini, where I would export my character animation from Maya as an alembic, pull that alembic into Houdini, and replace the alembic at the top of my fur simulation node tree, and run the simulation of the fur for that particular animation. I stayed in Houdini for my lighting and rendering pass. I was rendering using Redshift in Houdini. At this point I had grown very comfortable in Houdini, and I was beginning to see the other benefits it would bring for things like lighting and rendering, which are incredibly powerful tools in there. So again, I worked through 250 plus shots, bringing everything from Maya into Houdini, running fur simulations and lighting every scene. I would then take my nice rendered frames into After Effects, which is where I did all my post-processing and color grading, export those out and replace each of my play blasted shots in my edit with the nice new final rendered frames. Something I didn't mention in the edit earlier was that I actually developed the music and sound along with the edit. So I sourced some artists online whose music I not only loved, but that I felt matched the tone of what I was trying to achieve with the film at the various shifting emotional beats of the story. So I was cutting the film together simultaneously to my music so that I could really marry the two mediums. And I was working in the sound design for the diegetic audio into the mix. And so just like that, after about 4 years of my spare time, I was finally done making my 11-minute animated short film I called Solstice. Can you say thanks for watching? Thanks for watching, bye!